what are things that parents can do to help their kids cope?
Knowing what you can do is helpful.
Yeah.
And but also knowing that kids will come to it and accept it when they're ready and not a second before, that's also helpful to know. So there's some of the basics, and I'm sure everyone is saying this, and I but the older I get, the more I really appreciate that some of the tried and true, everything that your grandmother ever told you needed to do, are actually really important. So we know that getting good sleep is critical. And good sleep isn't just the amount of sleep, um, but also the timing. So the more regular schedules can be, and I know I have a almost 15-year-old, so I know that that sometimes feels almost impossible. And making sure that the quality of sleep is good, um, getting outside, getting sunlight, getting physical exercise regularly, having meaningful or important things to do is really key to mental health. So things that the child cares about, things that they're invested in, things that make them feel good about themselves, um, social connection, all of these kind of basic things on which mental health is built have to be in place, or else none of our interventions really will be all that effective. And then I think beyond that, uh, and in an individual way. So again, recognizing who the child is, thinking about what are skills that they can use to manage difficult situations. So it is important for kids to have challenges, to have the opportunity to flex a little bit their coping skills. Now we're getting that in spades right now, so I don't feel like as though we need to add any more. Um, and and not to be overwhelmed by that, but to really have opportunities to practice things like problem solving. Right, when a
Mm.
situation comes up, how can you think through different ways of addressing it, and evaluate those solutions and then come up with a plan.
I
Um,
love this so much because in mindful parenting, we teach win-win problem solving method. And I always ask every member to start with a positive problem, like, what are we going to do this weekend? Or where are we going? And we go through a process
yeah,
to involve kids in the problem solving. And what's
yes,
beautiful about that is that kids learn this skill, right? That they need for their life. And so we can do that with a positive problem, like, what are we going to do? And we can also, if we're in the habit of that, we can do that with challenging problems like, oh, like we've been all feeling anxious and depressed
yeah.
recently because it's like gray and about to snow 5 inches and we're stuck in the house because we're quarantined for 10 days.
For example,
For example, not to get too specific here.
I think what you're saying is so important, and I love the idea of bringing kids into the problem solving, even at a young age.
Yes.
I think as adults, sometimes we tend to do it for them, and that's where we become solution generating machines. But that is much less helpful than having kids involved in thinking through, obviously in an age appropriate way,
Yeah.
thinking through what to do and involving them in a genuine way in generating solutions. I
Yes.
think that's excellent, and I love the idea of a positive problem as a starting point.
And I imagine a lot of parents can get frustrated sometimes with their a kid's fear and reluctance to kind of do certain tasks,
Mhm.
or to maybe afraid to take that step. And so when that situation is happening, what do you advise for the parents and for the kids?
Yeah. So that it is very common for parents to be frustrated, and especially when sometimes these things are affecting everyone's life.
Yeah.
It's making it hard for the family to function, or as you're saying, if parents aren't able to sleep or engage in other activities because they have to stay with their child all night, that takes a toll on everyone. But it is important to stay calm and not get angry, because that's as much as possible, that's not going to be helpful to the child. And the idea is that kids are really doing the best that they can. Um, they're not being willful. They aren't happy with the situation either. They're just stuck. And
Mhm.
so we want to help unstick them. And
Mhm.
getting angry and frustrated isn't going to unstick them. And so the question is, well, what can the child do? If they can't do what we're asking them to do, it probably means it's too hard.
Mm.
But what can they do? I always sort of say the only option that's not on the table is doing nothing. That's the only one I kind of refuse to. Beyond that, I'm willing to think about anything that will help get us to the goal.
Mhm.
And if you think about one way that we sometimes think about that be helpful is in terms of level of anxiety. So very few of us will do things that are an 8, a 9, or a 10 out of 10. I don't know
Mhm.
about you, but something that's a 10 out of 10, I stay as far away from as possible. And if I do it once, I don't do it again. I learned my lesson with the
I am
trapeze.
not petting any spiders.
Correct. Right. Yep, I had visions of myself flying through the air on a trapeze, and it turns out when I got up there, I'm really scared of that. And yeah, that's not something I'm ever doing again. Let's just be clear. It was a little embarrassing when they have to lower you down slowly as you scream.
Oh,
It's not
no.
particularly appealing.
I can so feel you though. I think we have more anxieties about those as things as we get older. Like, and I did a just a little digression. I did a ropes like high in the trees
Uh-huh.
ropes course with my older
Oh,
daughter when she turned 10. She's like, "Oh, I can do it with you if you go with me." And I'm like, "I'm the brave one. Sure, here we go, honey." And I had to like clip her into these 50-foot trees. And then there was a part where we swung, like, on a trapeze, like, into, like, a net, and no one else was doing it, but I was like, "Ah!" like, screaming bloody murder. It was like, I didn't know how afraid I was gonna be of that.
right. It's probably a good thing to be afraid of falling from high places through the air,
Yeah,
hoping that this little clip is going to save you. I have a healthy respect for that. And so I think we can relate to that because that's
yeah,
sometimes what seems like a minor, unreasonable fear to us is actually that level of fear for the child.
yeah,
And so knowing that none of us are really particularly pleased with having to do those things, and if someone tried to force me to do it, I'd probably get kind of mad.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
we
you'd be
forget,
really defensive. Yeah. Oh, it's so helpful to, like, put it into a fear we can relate to.
yeah, and we call it the fight or flight for a reason. We always forget about the fight part, but kids can get pretty angry and oppositional if we push them because that's what we're designed to do. So
Mm,
rather than push it to an extreme where the child is going to be overwhelmed, have it be such a negative experience, they're unlikely to do it again, we want to think about shooting for a range, especially at the beginning, along the lines of like a 3 out of 10.
mm,
Right. So how can we make this situation a 3 out of 10? Or maybe like at most a 5 out of 10? Because or 5 out of 10 is unpleasant, but you can
mhm,
tolerate it and you
mhm,
might be willing to do it again. And so really working with your child to think about and have them tell you, well, this would be a 3, this would be a 5, this would be a 7. That will help guide you as a parent in terms of where to push and where to back off.
mm.
So again, we don't want to be at a 0. We don't want to sort of support complete avoidance and not encourage them, but we also don't want to push them so hard that they can't do it. And really kind of shooting for that middle ground, especially early on, I think is probably the most helpful way to think of it.
Catch new episodes of the Mindful Mama podcast and other free resources, including the Mindful Mom Guide at mindfulmamamentor.com. You can listen to every back catalog episode, including interviews with Dr. Dan Siegel, Ianla Van Zant, Sharon Salzberg, and get meditations, join our private Facebook group, and more. Go to mindfulmamamentor.com now. I'll see you there.